Every single autumn, across America and Europe, something extraordinary happens that nobody notices. While you're scrolling through your phone, millions of tons of one of humanity's most perfect foods is rotting on sidewalks, clogging lawnmowers, and being stuffed into garbage bags. This is Wyatt from Nature's Forgotten World, and I'm about to show you something that could fundamentally change how you think about food, survival, and your relationship with the planet itself. But before we dive into this rabbit hole, if you're interested in forgotten knowledge that could transform your life, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming on this channel. And seriously, share this with someone you care about. They need to know this too. The substance I'm talking about? An acorn. That's right, the tiny nut that squirrels hoard and your neighbors rake into trash piles is literally the reason your ancestors didn't starve to extinction. Let me paint you a picture. Right now, across the globe, we're facing something massive. Food prices are skyrocketing. Supply chains are breaking down like old machinery. The soil beneath our feet is dying because we've spent centuries treating it like a factory instead of a living system. Crop failures are becoming more common. People are going hungry while we waste resources we don't have. Yet every single autumn, the oak trees of the Northern Hemisphere drop millions upon millions of tons of nutritionally dense food. We're talking about billions of calories just sitting there. And what do? We hire people to clear it away. We bag it up. We haul it to landfills. We treat it as a nuisance. The irony is almost unbearable. We've engineered complex agricultural systems that require constant intervention, enormous amounts of water, chemical treatments, and annual replanting, all while ignoring a food source that grows itself, needs almost no maintenance, and has been feeding human beings successfully for tens of thousands of years. The acorn contains more healthy fat than salmon. It has more protein than wild rice. It's loaded with minerals that modern diets are chronically deficient in. If the sidewalks were instead covered in free loaves of bread, cuts of premium steak, or blocks of butter, people would be filling their pockets and making headlines. But because it comes wrapped in nature instead of plastic, we call it trash. When you examine the biology of an acorn, the data becomes almost embarrassing. Depending on the variety, acorns contain up to 30% fat. But here's the key detail. It's not just any fat. It's oleic acid, the same beneficial fat found in olive oil. It's what nutritionists call nature's butter, and your body thrives on it. The protein content sits around 8%, which might sound modest until you realize that acorns contain all 9 essential amino acids. That means your body can use every bit of that protein. They're also packed with calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus, minerals that strengthen your bones, support your nervous system, and keep your muscles functioning. Compare this to wheat, which forms the foundation of modern diets. Wheat is almost entirely starch. When you consume bread or pasta, your body converts that starch into sugar within minutes. Your blood glucose spikes. Your pancreas releases insulin to manage the surge. You get a brief energy boost, followed by a crash that leaves you more exhausted than before. It's like trying to heat your house with wet wood. You get some warmth, but mostly just inefficiency and waste. Acorns work differently. Because they're high in fat and complex carbohydrates, they digest slowly. A small amount of acorn meal provides sustained energy for hours. Your blood sugar remains stable. Your energy doesn't crash. You stay warm and capable during cold weather in ways that refined grains simply cannot match. Travel backward through history to ancient Greece. Specifically, imagine standing in the mountainous region called Arcadia. The story we're taught in schools talks about the rise of agriculture and civilization, but if you look closer at what these people actually ate, you discover something fascinating. The ancient Greeks had a name for a group of people, the Balanairoi, or acorn eaters. Their philosophers wrote that the oak tree was the first tree created by the gods themselves, and acorns were the first food given to humanity. This wasn't primitive subsistence. This was a sophisticated understanding of nutrition and agriculture. But the true golden age of acorn culture wasn't in the Mediterranean. It was right here in North America, specifically in what we now call California. Before the gold rush devastated the region, California was the most densely populated area north of Mexico. Here's what makes this remarkable. The indigenous peoples who lived there didn't farm using conventional methods. They didn't plow fields, they didn't plant corn in rows or wheat in organized patches. They didn't need to. They had inherited something far more effective, a functioning food forest. The Miwok, the Pomo, and the Kumeyaay tribes built a thriving, complex civilization almost entirely on the foundation of acorns. Picture an autumn day in a California oak grove 500 years before European contact. The air carries a rhythmic thumping sound. Hundreds of women are standing together, pounding acorns into flour using stone mortars and grinding basins. Massive granaries woven from willow branches and insulated with pine needles stand like ancient silos, completely filled with thousands of pounds of processed nuts and seeds. This wasn't survival at the edge of starvation. This was abundance. A single healthy oak tree can produce up to 500 pounds of acorns during a good year. A family could harvest enough food in 3 weeks to feed themselves for 2 entire years. While European peasants broke their backs plowing rocky, exhausted soil and lived in constant fear that a single crop failure would mean death, the acorn people harvested a crop that never failed. They had built a society on reliability and genuine wealth. They called acorns the staff of life, the foundation that held everything together. If acorns are so remarkable, why aren't you eating acorn cereal? Why don't bakeries sell acorn bread? Why has this knowledge almost completely vanished from Western consciousness? The answer starts with chemistry. If you pick a raw acorn from the ground and bite into it, your mouth will immediately pucker. The taste is intensely bitter, almost unpleasant. That bitterness comes from a compound called tannic acid. It's the oak tree's natural defense mechanism, designed by evolution to prevent squirrels and insects from destroying the tree's reproductive potential. If you consumed large quantities of raw acorns, you would develop stomach problems. But here's what's important. Ancient peoples solved this problem thousands of years ago. It wasn't a mystery they struggled with. They discovered a straightforward process called leaching. The chemistry is simple. You grind the acorn meat into coarse flour, you place it in water. The tannic acid is water-soluble, which means it bonds with water and dissolves away. The healthy fats and nutrients, however, are not water-soluble. They stay behind in the flour, while the bitter compounds wash away into the water. The result, after a week of this simple process, is a sweet, nutty, fatty flour that's incredibly dense in energy and completely harmless to eat. The tannins weren't actually the reason we stopped eating acorns. They were just the excuse we used. The true villain in this story is much darker and more deliberate. It's power, it's control, it's the systematic erasure of a way of living that threatened the foundation of empire. When the Roman legions marched across Europe, and later when European settlers reached the Americas, they brought with them a specific vision of civilization. They brought wheat, they brought barley, they brought cattle. They brought the entire infrastructure of organized, centralized agriculture. Here's the crucial part. Wheat requires something that acorns don't. Wheat demands that you stay in one place. You must defend your field from wild animals and other people. You must plant it every single year. You have no option to simply leave and return when needed. Wheat creates dependency and immobility. But most importantly, from the perspective of those in power, wheat is visible and controllable. A king's tax collector can walk to your barn, measure your grain with precision, and take his cut with absolute certainty. There's no hiding grain. There's no denying harvest numbers. The entire feudal system was built on the ability to control grain production and distribution. An oak tree is fundamentally different. It's wild, it's abundant, it cannot be controlled. People can simply walk into the woods whenever they need food and take what they want directly from nature. Acorns represented freedom, independence, and self-reliance. Wheat represented centralized power, the state, and complete dependence on authority. In medieval Europe, the ruling classes didn't just ignore acorns, they actively worked against them. They branded acorns as food fit only for pigs and animals. They began a systematic campaign to cut down the ancient oak forests that had sustained communities for millennia. They replaced them with wheat fields and used the timber for building warships that would expand their empires. They literally declared war on the wild commons. When Spanish missionaries arrived in California and encountered indigenous people thriving on acorns, they didn't see a sophisticated and sustainable food system. They saw primitive people living outside the reach of civilization and church control. The Spanish forced these tribes to labor in fields growing corn and wheat, not because these crops were more nutritious or healthier, but because they represented civilization and dependence. The Spanish needed to demonstrate control over the land and the people. We didn't abandon acorns because they were inferior food. We abandoned them because they fed free people, and the empires that were forming needed subjects and dependents, not independent foragers. Let's examine what happens when you try to grow wheat compared to what happens when you let oak trees do their work. To produce a loaf of bread, we must wage war against nature itself. We spray herbicides across entire fields to eliminate competing plants. We run heavy plows through soil, destroying the network of worms and fungal systems that have taken decades to build. We pump enormous quantities of water from aquifers that took thousands of years to fill. We spray pesticides to kill insects, which destroys the food chain that feeds birds and smaller predators. We must repeat this entire exhausting process every single year without exception. The moment a farmer stops this cycle, the food production stops. Wheat is a high-maintenance system that demands constant intervention and resources. Now, examine the oak tree. It's a perennial crop. You can plant it once, and it produces food for 500 years. Its root system extends 30 feet deep into the earth, finding water far below the surface where drought cannot reach it. It requires no irrigation. Its leaves fall in autumn and decompose, feeding the soil and restoring nutrients that other crops deplete. It doesn't need plowing because its presence actually holds soil together and prevents erosion that destroys farmland. The oak is a carbon sequestration machine. While it feeds you, it's pulling carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and storing it in wood. It's fighting climate change while feeding us. Consider the complete picture. We're systematically destroying our planet's capacity to support life, poisoning soil, depleting aquifers, releasing greenhouse gases in order to grow annual grains that require destructive practices, while we simultaneously ignore perennial trees that heal the planet while feeding us. We're burning down a forest to grow crops in a desert when an oak grove could do the job better, heal the soil, feed wildlife, and sequester carbon all at the same time. We call oak trees weeds in our manicured lawns and suburban landscapes. We spend money on almond flour imported from desert regions where the aquifer is collapsing from overuse. We've normalized an economic and ecological system that makes no rational sense whatsoever. To understand the real cost of what we've abandoned, we need to hear the human side of this story. We need to understand what was lost. There's an account recorded in the early 1900s from elders of the Mono tribe living in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Anthropologists interviewed these tribal leaders, and one grandmother shared her memories of the time before settlers arrived. She spoke about the rhythm of the acorn year. It wasn't something she worried about in the abstract sense. It was the central organizing principle of her entire existence. When the first acorns began dropping from the trees each autumn, it was celebrated as a festival. Children would race each other to collect them. The entire community would gather in the evenings to crack and shell the nuts together while telling stories around fires. She described the taste of acorn mush that had been cooked with hot stones dropped into watertight baskets. She said it tasted like home. It wasn't merely calories, it was identity, culture, and connection. When European settlers arrived and cut down the oak groves to plant apple orchards or create pasture for cattle, the elders mourned with a grief that was almost spiritual in depth. They weren't just losing a food source, they were losing their independence and their connection to the land that had sustained their ancestors for 10,000 generations. There's a phrase from indigenous cultures that carries profound meaning. When the oak is gone, the people are gone. The acorn wasn't just a nut to be tallied in a nutrition database. It was the mother that fed them, sustained them, and anchored their entire way of life. Today, when we walk past an oak tree and see nothing but yard waste and inconvenience, we're walking past the ghost of that grandmother who understood the tree as the embodiment of life itself. We're ignoring the consequences of a choice our ancestors made centuries ago. But here's something that should give you hope. The story isn't finished. The oak trees are still here, and they're waiting. A new generation is beginning to wake up and remember what we forgot. We're witnessing a massive resurgence in what's called the decolonized diet, a conscious movement to reclaim indigenous food systems and ancestral eating patterns. Chefs like Sean Sherman, known in culinary circles as the sous chef, are winning prestigious James Beard Awards by rejecting colonial-imposed foods and bringing back indigenous ingredients like acorns. It's no longer just a curiosity, it's becoming celebrated in sophisticated kitchens. In Korea, the tradition never died. While Western culture was systematically erasing acorn knowledge, Korean communities continued maintaining their connection to acorn cuisine. If you walk into a Korean market today, you can purchase dotorimuk, acorn jelly, as a standard side dish. It's cherished for its earthy flavor and recognized health benefits. They never forgot what their ancestors knew. In the Western world, the gluten-free movement has accidentally stumbled upon something remarkable. Millions of people who developed digestive problems from modern processed wheat started searching for alternatives. They discovered acorn flour, completely gluten-free, low on the glycemic index, and delicious in ways that modern grain substitutes aren't. Instead of viewing this as a return to an ancient food, they're embracing it as a cutting-edge modern superfood. Foragers and survival enthusiasts are leading the educational charge. YouTube channels with millions of views demonstrate how to create acorn coffee, acorn pancakes, and acorn flour from scratch. The conversation has shifted. It's no longer being discussed as primitive food. It's being celebrated as a sophisticated, nutrient-dense superfood worthy of gourmet applications. We're slowly remembering something essential. The best food isn't manufactured in a factory on the other side of the world. It's found waiting for us in the forest. If everything I've shared resonates with you, if you're feeling that pull to connect with something more real and more reliable, then this is your moment to act. Share this message with people in your life who care about health, sustainability, and genuine food. Leave a comment telling me what surprised you most about acorns. Subscribe to Nature's Forgotten World because we're uncovering these forgotten truths every single week. The acorn represents something far deeper than just free pancakes or a novel cooking ingredient. It's a different philosophy for living on this planet. There's a concept called restoration agriculture, the understanding that we shouldn't spend all our energy fighting against nature to produce food. Instead, we should mimic nature's own systems. A healthy forest is self-sustaining. It produces massive quantities of food without requiring human labor or intervention beyond the harvest itself. Imagine if we shifted our dietary foundation from annual grains like wheat and corn to perennial tree crops like acorns, chestnuts, and walnuts. Consider what would change. We would stop the erosion that destroys topsoil. We would extract carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it permanently. We would create habitats for wildlife that's currently vanishing. We would sequester greenhouse gases, and we would still feed the entire human population. The oak tree teaches patience. It demonstrates the value of thinking in terms of centuries rather than quarters. A wheat field lives for a single season. An oak grove thrives for 1,000 years. We've constructed a civilization based on speed and immediate returns. Fast food, fast profits, fast crops, fast consumption. The acorn is the antidote to that frantic pace. It's slow food in the truest meaning of that phrase. We began this exploration looking at rotting nuts on autumn sidewalks, wondering why we treat treasure as if it were garbage. Through research and history, we discovered that the humble acorn was the fuel for human evolution, the foundation of lost civilizations, and the victim of a deliberate war for political control and cultural dominance. But here's the beautiful truth about the acorn. It is patient. It has survived ice ages that wiped out megafauna. It has survived the Roman Empire and its expansion. It has survived the Industrial Revolution and the mechanization of agriculture. It remains every single autumn, dropping its abundance and waiting for us to develop the wisdom and the hunger to pick it up again. The next time you hear that particular crunch under your boot, stop for a moment. Pick one up. Feel the weight of it in your palm. You're holding a seed that could grow into a giant tree. You're holding a meal that kept your ancestors alive through starvation and hardship. You're holding proof that we've had the answer to our problems all along. We just forgot. Maybe it's time we stopped looking to grocery stores and massive corporations for our salvation. Maybe it's time we started looking at the trees. The forgotten staple is ready to be remembered. Nature's Forgotten World is here to help you reconnect with that knowledge, one video at a time. If you're ready to start exploring your own acorn journey this autumn, or if you're simply ready to stop seeing nature as a scenic backdrop and start understanding it as a genuine provider and healer, please share this video with everyone you know. Drop a comment, subscribe to the channel. Let's bring back the age of the oak together.